Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Paints September Color Kits collection. Well, I did a little bit of die cutting before I started the video. I used some Spellbinders cutting dies. This nested set of dies is called Essential Hexi Gems, and they had this six-sided shape in various sizes. So I cut out a smaller shape and for the pattern paper, and then a larger shape for the white cardstock. And I'm going to be mounting each of those pattern paper six-sided shapes. Can we call them hexagons? I don't know, because all the sides are not the same length, but in any case, I mounted each of those on the white cardstock. First, though, I inked the edges with some Distress Oxide. I used Fossilized Amber for the yellow shapes. I used Kitsch Flamingo for the pink shapes, and Salvaged Patina for the blue shapes. So I have them arranged on a piece of gessoed smooth white cardstock. I use my pencil to remind me of where I put them so that now when I'm putting the mixed media on the background, I'll know just a rough idea anyway of where all the shapes are going to go. Something I wanted to mention that I didn't include on the video was that I cut out another shape, the smaller shape, out of white cardstock, and I later on mounted that behind each of the pattern paper shapes. I wanted to give those shapes a little bit of dimension, and I forgot to do that. I didn't forget to cut out the shapes. I just forgot to attach them to the pattern paper shapes before I attached them down to the larger shapes. So I did that off camera, and I don't think it makes a huge difference, but it's something I like to do. I always like there to be a little bit of dimension, even if there isn't a lot. Now I'm going in with my Shimmerz paints and I'm adding a mixed media background. As I often do, I'm using the packaging technique, which is taking a piece of plastic and putting some color on that and then kind of squishing it into the paper. I'm using a couple of different colors. Right now I'm using a Vibez called Love Ocean number 9. And I not only added some with the packaging, I also added some splatters. The main area where you're going to see the paint is on either side of the shapes, but I also want to make sure that I have some color in between the shapes. Even though there's only going to be a very small amount of space between the shapes, I still need to make sure that there's some color. I don't want it to be a white background. And I'm matching the paint color to the pattern paper color. And earlier, I took a photo when I had all of the shapes laid out on the background, and you could see that I have that photo visible on my phone to the left of my mat, and now I'm adding some yellow paint to the background in the places where I know the yellow shapes are going to go. For the yellow color, I'm using a Twinklingz called Mind Your Bees-ness. The Twinklingz come in little pans, and you spray some color on them to activate the color. And then I use my brush, I put that paint on the piece of plastic, and then I'm doing the same thing I did with the blue paint, just kind of squishing it in. And you can see here that I'm using my heat tool just to dry the paint a little bit so that I can add a second application and build up the intensity of the color. And this color is looking kind of crazy, I have to say, but I think that once you see it with the shapes on top, it'll look a little bit better. So next I'm adding a pink color that is a Vibez called Sweetheart, and this was included in the color kit for this month, as was the Mind Your Bees-ness. And now I'm adding the pink, and I think that these three colors together look so amazing. This is one of my favorite color combinations. And I'm making a concerted effort not to be so stingy with the paint. I'm trying to make my mixed media look a little bit less controlled and a little bit more free, I guess you could say. So I put the shapes back on the background to see where I needed to add more paint, and I realized there were a couple of areas where I needed to add some more color. So I drew some pencil lines to help me know exactly where I needed to put that paint, and so now I'm adding some more paint in those spots. So I wanted to apologize. I haven't had a lot of videos up on my channel, definitely not process videos. And I'm really sorry. I had a lot going on in September, but luckily everything seems to be resolved. I got transferred to another school in my same district. I have been in the same school for 24 years, so it was a big change for me to go to a new school, but now I've kind of settled in there and I really love my new school. So I'm all set with that. And then I had some issues with my dog Jackson with his health. We had a really big scare and it really kind of upset me for quite a few weeks until we figured out what was wrong. He had an issue with his spleen. A blood test showed that there was potentially something wrong with his spleen. So they did an ultrasound and they found a bump on his spleen. So I brought him to a specialist because my vet couldn't do the test that was needed. And the specialist that I spoke to, unfortunately, did not think there was a very good prognosis. I'm not going to get into it, but I left that appointment thinking there was really no hope for him. So I was really upset, but luckily we decided to take his spleen out. Again, a long story because you can live without your spleen, and whatever that bump was, it could turn into something if it wasn't already something. But the chances were, unfortunately, that it was cancer. It turned out, thank goodness, not to be cancer, and he's going to be just fine. But it took a long time to find that out, and luckily, he's healthy, and we're just so happy because we were really scared we were going to lose him. So I'm really sorry for this too. I was not able to include the footage of when I added the modeling paste through the stencil to my background. For some reason, I lost that footage. But I'm going to add a little bit more stenciling a little bit later in the video, so you'll be able to see that process. Not that it's so complicated, but just in case you were interested in seeing that. So I added some white splatters to the background. I also added a couple of black splatters. I used white and black watered down acrylic paint. That's something that I do all the time. I tried attaching the shapes down with my ATG adhesive, but it was not working because of the modeling paste on the background. So I decided to use liquid glue. And then initially I didn't think I was going to, but I decided to fill in those spaces on either side of the bottom row with some shapes. I had another pink shape, but I was thinking that I needed to put a yellow shape on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go back in later. I think I do this off camera with a little tiny piece. I'm going to die cut that out and then attach that on the right. And that way there'll be the same number of pink, blue, and yellow shapes. Even though there's just little pieces of some of them, it will balance off, I thought, the colors on the layout. So I used my Tim Holtz scissors and I trimmed off all the excess once the glue was pretty much dry. Now we get these sheets in many of the Shimmerz kits, and I love these because you can really extend the number of layouts you can make because there are so many embellishments on this page. It's almost like getting another ephemera pack. But the nice thing is that you can color them in however you want. So I had already picked out a couple of ephemera pieces that I wanted to use. I think I picked out 2 butterflies and a cactus. And I decided I was going to add a few more pieces from this sheet. So I'm going to paint the cactus. I'm also going to paint all of those pink, I'm sorry, they're not pink yet, all of the butterflies that are right on top of the cactus. And I'm also going to paint the sun that's up on the top. And I'm going to use the same colors that I used for the mixed media in the background. And I think that my main tip for painting pretty much anything is to not paint in large flat areas. You want to have some areas that are lighter, some areas that are darker, and maybe even some areas where you don't apply any paint at all. And I think that you can get a lot of really interesting variation just keeping that in mind. And then one other piece of advice I could offer is that when you're trying to decide which parts to make darker and which parts to make lighter, try to think about where there would be shadows on that image. And I think that it really helps to look at that same thing if you can in person, or just look at a picture from the internet, and that could kind of help you figure out where the lighter and darker places would be on it. So of course the sun is stylized, so I couldn't look at a picture, but what I did was I decided that I was going to make each of the little rays on the sun half a little darker and half a little bit lighter. And the paint that I use for the sun is a Shimmerz called Fire and Ice. And unfortunately, I left the top off. I didn't screw it all the way on, so it leaked all over the inside of a plastic bag. Luckily, I had it inside of a sealed plastic bag. But a little bit of the Shimmerz paint goes such a long way that it really wasn't a problem. I was able to paint in the whole sun, and there was still some left in the container. But I'm going to have to get another one of those because it's super, super shimmery and shiny, and I really like yellow. I use yellow on my layouts all the time. And then for the butterflies, I used Sweetheart, the same color I use on the background. That's the darker color of pink. And then I used a Creameez called Pink Champagne for the lighter color. So now I have all of my painted images cut out, and then I'm adding in some of those ephemera pieces. So I was thinking that to make all of them match, I would use a fine tip black pen and make an outline around the outside of the ephemera pieces. So that's what I'm doing here. And I think that it was pretty effective in bringing all the pieces together. So since everything had a black outline, I decided I was going to draw a black outline on the bottom of the cactus. And then I was also thinking that I wanted to use the other cactus that was one of the ephemera pieces. So I'm going to add some sand to the bottom of that in a moment. I also drew an outline around the snake, but I didn't end up using that snake on the layout. But here I'm making a base for the other cactus. I'm using the Mind Your Bees-ness, and I wanted to use the cut apart paper. There was a little spot you could see there where there was nothing printed, and since this paper takes the paint so well, I thought that I might as well take advantage of that. I added some yellow paint to it, and now I'm putting it aside to dry, and I'll show you how I add a little bit of sand to the bottom of the other cactus in a few minutes. So here's my photo. I am mounting it on a very, very thin mat of black paper. This is a photo of my husband, my daughters, and me, and we're at a farm, an alpaca farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I know this is a Southwestern themed collection, but it just looked to me with all the alpacas and the sand that's on the grounds that it could kind of go along with that theme. So I added some adhesive to my photo, and I made sure it was straight with my T-square. And now I'm adding the embellishments to the page. So I have that sun, and I have the cactus that I painted, and then there's that cactus on the other side of the photo, and I'm also spreading all those butterflies all around. There was also a cool little, I guess, a lizard or a salamander, and I really liked that pink lizard, so I put that underneath the photo and on top of one of the shapes that had pink on it so that they would kind of go together. Here I'm attaching down my sun using ATG adhesive, and then I'm going to go around the rest of the layout, and I'm going to add adhesive to each of these elements, and I'm going to attach them down. And for me, I don't really use a ton of embellishments on this page. There are a number of them, but I don't go crazy because I think there's already so much going on with all the pattern papers. So now that that yellow paint is dry, I took my marker and I drew a line all around the bottom to mimic the bottom of the other cactus so that the two would look like they had some relation to each other. And then I attach that little piece down, and then I place that cactus back where it was on the opposite side of the layout. And then I also added some thick white cardstock to the back of both of the cacti because they're resting on top of the photo, and I wanted to make sure they were really sturdy. That's something that I love to do. I'm sure that nobody else wants to do that. I don't know what it is about me. I really like when the embellishments are like super sturdy, even if they're going to be elevated even the slightest bit on my layout. It's really not necessary. It's just something that I do. And then I also added one of the dots from the kit to the right-hand side. I layered it right on top of the cactus. So I thought for a long time about what I wanted to call this layout, and I totally admit I looked online to see if I could find something to help me out, and I did find this title. I thought it was really cute. It's called Funny Farm. I used some thickers. They're called Lindsay, and they are black with little teeny tiny white dots on them, and I just really liked the font. I thought they were the right size, so I went ahead with these letters for my title. And then I always like to add photo corners, maybe not always, but almost always. So I used my punch. I punched out some photo corners and I inked the edges so that they would stand out. And then I had to add some jewels to my butterflies. I didn't want to have a layout where I didn't add some kind of a jewel or a pearl or a enamel dot. So I used these little strips of pearls and I added them to the centers of all of the butterflies. And then I also couldn't resist adding a little something to the photo corners. It's something I've gotten in the habit of doing. So I added some really tiny enamel dots, and now the layout is complete, and here are a few close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making this layout. I also want to say thank you very much for the well wishes for Jackson. I am not going to lie, it was a really hard time, and I really appreciate all of your thoughtfulness to help me get through it. Thank you so much. Please check out the link in the description box, or the links in the description box, where you can find a link to the Color Kitz collection, to a Color Kitz subscription, and also to the Shimmerz shop. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.